So firstly, I'd like to start off by defining what 21st century teaching means to me. So despite my discipline areas being both history and politics, and which both dwell in the humanities realm, I've always believed that teaching should be about preparing students for the future, for the future careers that they'll be in and the world that they're about to go into once they leave school. So through my teaching of politics in particularly, I think it's very important to provide students um, with an understanding of the Australian political system. Myself, having come in from a low socioeconomic area and school, I've noticed with a lot of people my age, there is a general disinterest and a distrust of the political system in Australia for a number of reasons. So I believe that a firm teaching and an entertaining teaching of the political system will benefit students in the long run. The teaching of both history and politics provides students with some really key skills for going into 21st century work. Like I said earlier, preparing them for the world that they're going to enter once they finish school is the number one priority of teachers. It should be across the curriculum, no matter what subject. And when you are looking at the curriculum for both history and politics, skills like critical thinking are in there. They play a big role. Skills like research skills and the appropriate use of information technology, they're in there as well, which are both extremely crucial skills that employers look for when they are hiring someone new. So for me, teaching does revolve largely around preparing students for the future. This is a view which is backed up by Dr. Patrick Maguire, who wrote in an article that the future of the students depends on flexibility and resourcefulness, not the results of a standardized test that's given to every single student. So throughout my time of both being in the education system and teaching myself on my teaching placements, which I'm at now, I have encountered a large number of approaches to teaching. At Rosebud Secondary College, I've been tasked with creating an entire unit of work for Year 9 history revolving around the First World War. And the strategy that I've implemented for the entire unit is that of Anderson and Krathwohl, which is my personal favourite. It's basically a rehashed version of Bloom's taxonomy, which divides the cognitive processes into 6 stages, all of which must be achieved by the end of the unit. So the 6 processes are broken into remembering, understanding, analyzing, applying, evaluating, and creating. So all 6 of these processes, as you can see from top to bottom, they demonstrate surface learning, eventually progressing into a deeper understanding of the content knowledge, and then using that deeper understanding to create something new. This is something that's particularly useful when you are in a history classroom and in a humanities classroom, as both of them require deep levels of critical thinking. So as well as the cognitive processes as outlined before, another strategy which I like to apply, which I did more so last placement than my current one that I'm at now, is the gradual release of responsibility, which is by Dr. Douglas Fisher. Now, what that entails is at the start of a unit, what you do is it's very teacher orientated, teacher focused, while you are helping develop the core concepts of the unit. So as the unit progresses and the work gets continually harder and harder, the teacher eventually starts taking a back seat, hence the name, the release of responsibility. So at the start, when the concepts are new in the minds of the students, the teacher still plays a large role. However, towards the end, when the students should develop a deeper understanding of the content knowledge, that's when the teacher is able to kind of stand back and let the students do their work without too much interference. So just like the aforementioned pedagogical approach, this approach, it makes students develop a deeper understanding of the knowledge so that when the teacher does eventually take the back seat, they know exactly what they're doing and they don't need too much help from the teacher. The teacher's still there in the room, obviously, but more so just to help out and be more so a mediator than a dictator of learning. So in Australia, the curriculum and methods for schools, it's designed in such a way as to create active and informed citizens for the future, much like my personal view of what education should be. that it should provide students with an understanding of the world that they're going to go into once they finish their schooling. In order to do this, the national curriculum has been made, which ensures that every child in every state and territory receives the same level of education, so as no state or territory has an advantage over another when it comes to education. And in order to do this, they've implemented a series of what they call general capabilities, which each student needs to have by the time they finish their schooling in order to be successful in the future. I'll get into those general capabilities and what they are a little bit later. So before I get into the general capabilities for students, there's actually a long list of general capabilities for teachers as well, in order for them to become fully qualified teachers in Victoria or anywhere else in Australia, and they're called the AITSL standards. Now, these standards, since they were introduced, they have been hotly contested, but in more recent years, people have actually started to see their relevance and realize that they are a very good foundation for building teachers, basically from the ground up. So the achievement of these standards must be met at a graduate level in order for you to finish your degree, and then when you do finish your degree, you have to demonstrate more again before you are fully qualified as a teacher. As well as providing a foundation to build teachers basically from the ground up, the AITSL standards also provide some much needed professional and personal development, which is crucial in the education field, hence why teachers have a certain amount of PD days and hours they must complete on a yearly basis. As well as this, the AITSL standards and their implementation, it also adds a vast deal of credibility to the teaching field. There used to be a lot of stigma around education that anyone could be a teacher, whereas now these standards are put in place to make sure that not just anyone can be a teacher. In order to be one, you do have to fulfill this strict list of standards that we have given you. By ACARA, which also do the Australian curriculum, they range from a wide range of things that students must complete by the end of their schooling, and these things go from basic literacy skills and critical thinking skills to the use of information technology and computers, as well as numeracy skills. And all students must achieve this regardless of year level by the end of their schooling. So these are put in place to make sure, as I said before, that students leave their educational careers as more active and informed members of society, therefore they can prosper in the outside world. In regards to these standards is how teachers of, let's say, myself in humanities are going to implement numeracy skills in our curriculum. This has come up a lot, and vice versa. So how a maths teacher is going to implement literacy in their curriculums for students to achieve these general capabilities across all subjects? And the answer to that is pretty simple. So the answer to that is that all subjects, basically no matter what they are, have a certain amount of literacy and numeracy in them. Myself, in a history classroom, for example, if I ask students to develop a timeline of the First World War like they will be doing here at Rosebud Secondary College in the introduction lesson to the First World War, they have to have numeracy skills in order to develop a timeline, and vice versa. In maths, on exams, for example, there are always a certain amount of written questions in order to assess students' literacy as well as their numeracy, with the obvious other questions on the test. So both of my disciplines of history and politics, they are both very heavy on literacy. However, there are different general capabilities that are outlined by ACARA that are also extremely valuable in both history and politics. One of these being critical thinking, which in terms of history, politics, any humanities subject, critical thinking is extremely necessary if you're aiming to achieve the higher level of marks. And the critical thinking is what separates the kind of lower end students from the real higher end students. So in Year 12 history especially, when it comes to the source analysis, which is on the final exam, a level of critical thinking is 100% needed for that, as you have to determine the reliability of the source, where it came from, any biases that it could have depending on where it came from and whether or not these biases, have merit. And so critical thinking is needed for that, and that is what takes you from a credit or a pass up to a high distinction. So as well as critical thinking in the curriculum, one of the other general capabilities that are outlined is the effective and appropriate use of information technology, otherwise known as computers, of course. So this is an issue which many who still dwell in the old school camp oppose being put into the general capabilities and into the curriculum. However, for the most part, people really understand nowadays that computers are needed in the classroom, and you do need to know how to use them. When you are talking about history subjects especially, the computers become extremely useful because there is so much research involved, especially when doing assignments. A lot of the assignments dwell, largely on research. Most of the rubric grades is on how you research and how effectively you can research and use your time. So despite those who do still to this day dislike the use of technology in classrooms or are afraid of it in many cases, there's an overwhelming amount of support for the use of technology in the classroom, and that is demonstrated through Kara putting this general capability into their outline, that every student, regardless of different levels or different subjects, must know how to effectively use computers. Now, there are other scholars as well who back up this statement, such as Mark Prensky, who writes that nowadays when you're comparing students to, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, the students of today process information so much differently that computers are needed. And because of the use of computers, they can process information almost triple the time of people who completed their schooling 20 years ago without the use of computers. So as well as this, when you are looking at a discipline such as mine, being history or politics for that matter, computers are absolutely necessary when you think about the fact that yes, there are books in the library. However, these books, they do have authors, and the authors all have different biases. They come from different schools of thought when it comes to history especially, and different beliefs when it comes to politics. Therefore, the internet and computers is the perfect tool for those subjects, as it allows you to get many, many different views without having to scour a library for 5 hours looking for different views on the same issue.